Scarif Live. Let's see. There's a lot of buttons here. That's the wrong button. Hold on a second. Bear with me. I only have 2 hands. Let's see here. Hey, everybody. Is my microphone on? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Let's turn off this music here. There you go. Wave your hand if you can hear me. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Looks like we got a couple people in the chat. Ubaldo, good to see you, my friend. And, I would love to see you post a couple pictures of where you're going to put those stickers, because we had a nice little collection of stickers that we sent you. Very appreciative of your support throughout the Red 5 network. I see Ubaldo in our chats from time to time, and it's wonderful to see some regular folks enjoy a lot of the stuff that we talk about, a lot of nerdy things. So thank you very much. Another shout out to, there's a couple of people that constantly retweet my stuff, and I want to say thank you to you guys. Tina, we just had a review. Tina and I talked about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. We did a quick little review impromptu, so thank you very much, Tina. And Vader Rapina, Vader Rapina is an account that has been following us for a very long time, and I appreciate your support whenever we do some tweeting and some social media stuff. It's always a lot of fun. But this community is amazing. And I was just talking to my guest, Heidi. I'll bring her out in a second. But we were talking about how the internet really has given us an opportunity to meet a lot of people, both in person and virtually. I know a lot of shows that have, hosts and co-hosts that are kind of spread around the country and really around the world. It's really difficult to schedule, folks when we live really all over the place, West Coast, East Coast, the UK, Australia, wherever. But it's been a lot of fun, conversing and really making connections. I think social media really is probably, this is the best way to do it. So thank you everyone for supporting us here at Scarif. We have a very cool show, an awesome topic, and I know here at the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast, we usually go off the path to kind of find some really interesting topics and discussions. Tonight's show is going to be very cool. And I will drop the audio for this show on Tuesday for anybody that is not like a YouTube person and really likes to listen to the discussion, as they're driving to and fro on Monday mornings or Tuesday mornings. So I'll drop that audio in the podcatchers for you guys. But please, if you're here, thank you very much for stopping by, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up. Yeah, so what are we going to talk about? So I've got a wonderful guest. I have been kind of lurking in her chat for a while, talking about costumes and things like that. I'm going to ask her where, because I can't remember where we connected. I think I did a costume discussion 2 years ago with Marisha from Coruscant Radio Underground, I think, and then somewhere in there was a costume connection. But I'm going to bring Heidi out in a minute. But first, let me take a break, and we'll be right back after this.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
Excellent. Let's put myself over here. We got some things to show. Heidi, welcome to the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast.
Hi, Ro. Thanks so much for having me. That was a really cool opening there.
My background in broadcasting doesn't let me do things on the cheap. But yes, thank you so much. So thank you for agreeing to come on. I think again, being a fan of movies and a fan of especially the movies that we like to talk about, the science fiction and the fantasy. It's going to be a great discussion, and I want to but before we get into that, I mentioned that we're going to talk about costumes. One of the aspects of costumes that we're going to talk about, we decided to pick like 5 of our favorite costumes that for some reason speak to us or are interesting in the fandom, in movies and stuff like that. Some very iconic costumes that we'll talk about for sure. But before that, I was watching some of your old shows, and there is one aspect of costuming that I find interesting, and I think it started during the early days of the Avengers movies, from the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because I remember watching kind of like behind the scenes, and I love watching all that behind the scenes stuff because it really, that's one of the reasons I got into the field that I'm in, professional wise, watching behind the scenes of Star Wars and ILM and the model makers and the editors and the sound effects people. To me, I found that fascinating as a 7-8-year-old, and I wanted to absorb as much as I could, and practice. I blew stuff in the back. I blew stuff up in the backyard. I recorded stuff just like Ben Burt, the sound, the sound guy from Lucasfilm. I shot miniatures in the backyard. I mean, all that stuff, which
You're
for me,
basically Sid from Toy Story.
Exactly. So it's one of those things that really interests me. But watching, we get to a point in both the history of cinema, but really the advancement of technology where a lot of times it's indistinguishable when you're watching it, and unless you really know specifically what's real and what's not, you really your eyes can be really fooled. One of those aspects of the I think it was the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, there was a behind the scenes clip that I found fascinating, where I guess the Falcon had a head wrap, like the mask that went over the actor, and they were talking about how the material didn't really sit well on the actor's neck, this area right here, and they had to go in digitally to pretty much cover the fact that the actual fabric was opening every so often when he moved his neck. And I found it fascinating that they went in and created a 3D section of that costume to make it seem like it was sitting on his neck. And those are the little things that fascinate me from a special effects perspective that really blow my mind and continue to do so as I learn more about what special effects artists do to kind of help us transport ourselves to either a galaxy far, far away or some other dimension. And it's fascinating. But I was saying, I was watching one of your older shows, and you had someone on there talking about the sustainability of costume design and the material and stuff like that. Before we started the show, I kind of mentioned that it's kind of a double-edged sword where, the CGI costumes obviously are great to look at, but they take away work from artists. But at the same time, there's so much work put into these pieces that sometimes these beautiful costumes are only used once. And as your guest on the show said, sometimes they just get stuck in a box and they stay there for a really long time. I wanted to get your take on the show as far as the sustainability of the costume industry. Where do you stand on that? Because like I said, it is kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Well, I know I went down to see the exhibit for Thor Ragnarok, and I remember that Hela's, headdress, it was digital, but they had to like 3D print it as well. Like, so even though it was digitally done after the fact, they did have a digital 3D printing of it. So I think it's funny because I think this is the video regarding like looking 20 years in the future. And I think we're already seeing a lot of this stuff happen. But there's a lot of things regarding costumes. I don't think there's an issue with where the costumes end up. I think that there's always going to be a place, like a lot of them someone made a comment about this on the video actually. And I said, a lot of them do end up getting sold at an auction at the end. So after wrap, a lot of stuff gets auctioned off. It was funny when I was doing my original Star Wars video, like Alec Guinness's robe ended up back in the rental house where they had gotten it. And then they didn't realize it was there. And then one day someone found it. So that's the other thing. A lot of times if they're rented, they go back to the rental houses, they get auctioned, they go on tour, like, Game of Thrones, the costumes all go on tour.
Yeah.
A lot of them do get put back into stock. But I think where there is a big problem is the fact that they have to build so many costumes. Like, for instance, if there are stunts or there is blood or there is, the costumes have to go through a series of different distresses or what have you. They have to build multiple costumes. So that's not very sustainable. So like, for instance, if you did make one costume and then throughout the series of the production, you could just add the distressing on it digitally, that would, if you're going to be looking at reduce, reuse, recycle, the reduce is obviously going to be better and it will be cheaper, but there's still always going to be like, I'm not really worried for costume people. Like, I think there's always going to be people who are going to be needed. It's the same with them talking about actors being replaced. I'm not of the camp where I'm kind of worried about that because, you and I think are close in age. And there was a time when they said, the books are done. Everything's going to be digital. There's going to be no more paper books, or no one is going to go to the movies anymore because there's HBO. Like, I remember when HBO came out and they're like, that's it. People are going to be staying home watching HBO. No one's going to go to the theater. Well, people are going to the theater more than ever, right? So that's sort of how I feel about that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And absolutely. I think I think your point about the HBO and the theaters is well received, obviously. But I'm a big fan of theaters. It's funny though because with AI, I mean, people are saying the same thing that they've said in the past. As technology progresses, I guess we find new uses for that. But I think a lot of times the technology advances faster than we know what to do with. And I was telling you about our Canadian friend.
Oh,
Here
hi,
he is.
Charles.
Here he is. Too funny. Hey Charles, what's up? So yeah,
I was telling Ro that I'm an insecure Canadian, so I always have to mention that I'm Canadian on every possible way. So Charles, maybe you relate to that.
that's funny. Longtime listener asks if any Sandman costume fans from Logan's Run 1976. You're gonna have to watch the show, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah, and so I find that fascinating. Technology, and again, going back to my childhood watching Star Wars for the very first time, the technology of filmmaking and movie making was what kind of reeled me in, and it still does, to this day. I still find it fascinating what they're doing. You've got young Mark Hamill, popping up in brand new Star Wars, in The Mandalorian. They're still playing with a lot of that technology, but I think it's fascinating nevertheless. uh
Agreed.
yeah. What other things besides costume and stuff? I know you talk about that on your show, but what other things intrigue you in the filmmaking business?
Well, first of all, I'm a huge nerd, as I think many of your followers are. I have always been just like sort of. I have to repeat what you said. My very first experience watching Star Wars, that was probably the first time I really noticed a movie. Like, I'd watched The Wizard of Oz, or I don't know, I can't think of what other, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or something like that. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But when I saw Star Wars, I was 10. I went to see it at the theater with my dad. And I came home and I was like, oh my God. And then you were saying you needed to find out everything there was about
Mhm.
it. So there was like a making of Star Wars that came out on TV that I was just like obsessed with.
Yeah.
And then my brother was like a member of a Star Wars fan club. So I had to join that. And then, you would get monthly newsletters from
Right.
them. And my brother would buy Starlog magazine and I would pour over Starlog. And
I
so,
still
and then
have all mine.
you have all your Starlog.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then, and then for our Halloween that year, I dressed up as Princess Leia. My brother made my blaster for me out of like dowel and paper towel, cylinders
Cube.
and things like
Yeah.
that. So, that was probably my very first sort of experience with any kind of fandom. I didn't even know there was a fandom thing. I didn't even know that until probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And I felt so cheated that I didn't know about it.
Wow. You
So
mean
now I found my people.
you mean like a group of fans that loved the franchise?
Like love anything, like love to
Yeah.
nerd out over certain shows. So
Yeah.
I kind of got into my channel by doing fantasy, but sci-fi has always been my favorite. And then fantasy is probably like my next favorite, and then maybe horror. So I'm a huge like lover of movies, TV shows, series, and things like that. And so that's sort of where my passion starts. And then with the costumes, what I try to do is I try to talk about the storytelling through costume. That's sort of where I
Yeah.
come from it. So there could be things that are really beautiful and look amazing on an actor, but what's different with costuming as opposed to just fashion design is how it tells the story of the actors. And I think that's how I kind of started following you, because you talk a lot about that on Twitter. So I started following you, and then I started reacting to some of your posts and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's funny though, because a lot of people get into sci-fi and stuff like that because they love the visuals, they love the spaceships, they love all the adventure stories. But I think for me and a lot of people, it really is because of the behind the scenes and all the stuff, all the work. Even as a kid, I was just intrigued at the amount of work that was done to create this world out of nothing. It's like kind of a really cool world building experience for me, and I found that fascinating. Let's see. What comments do you have? The Viper pilots from Battlestar Galactica. Oh yeah, I love those. And it's funny because a lot of people try to get me to watch the new Battlestar Galactica, which I know is award winning and all that stuff. I still like the original BSG a lot better than the new stuff. I just can't wrap my head around a blonde Cylon for some reason. I don't know. Call me old
Yeah,
fashioned.
I'm a big fan of the original as well, and Buck Rogers, like any of those shows from the
Yeah.
70s and 80s, like those, I totally adore them, and I love kind of geeking out over over those shows. I'm actually thinking of doing a Buck Rogers in the 21st century breakdown of the costumes because I love that movie or that show so much.
Oh, you should absolutely do that. We a couple of weeks ago, or not weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago, one of our patrons and I got together and we talked about Buck Rogers in the 25th century. So it's really a great it's a great era. You had a lot of science fiction television from the late 70s, early 80s. Obviously, Battlestar Galactica. You had Buck Rogers. I think we're one of my followers that they really want to get into the V series, which happened in the early 80s. So
Oh, V.
yeah,
Yeah, that was awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Actually, that kind of scared me, that show. There were some scenes in that were really I think I probably was too young to watch it. They
Oh,
were
oh
very
yeah.
adult.
I remember. Yeah, I remember. There's some freaky parts, especially when when the humans found out that the visitors were not really humanoid, and I think it was Diana that took either it was a mouse or a hamster, and her jaw just opened, and then the hamster went in and she ate the rodent. That was kind of
Yeah.
spooky.
Oh, Charles is asking about Cylon. And no, it's not Bo-Katan. Bo-Katan was actually Katie Sackhoff. She was actually what's
Starbuck,
the Starbuck, exactly. Yeah. The
Cylone,
Cylon was
Bo-Katan.
Trisha. I can't remember the actress's name, but she's
Right.
Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, absolutely. And yes, Charles, Freddy Krueger was in V, and I think obviously before he was Freddy Krueger. So there's actually a lot of actors in that television show. Another very classic 70s series that we did a show on was Space 1999, which was another wonderful
Yeah.
show
And I
on
watched it
television.
for sure. It was great. The lady with the dot eyebrows. Dot, 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 dot. Well,
Um,
Martin, what's his name was in it? Martin Landau.
Oh yeah. The young lady with the dots on her forehead, her name was Mia. She was a
Mia,
changeling.
yes. It's been years.
My first TV crush.
Oh, well, I thought everyone was into Aaron from Buck Rogers, with
Aaron Gray.
the tight. Oh, Aaron Gray, yeah, in
Yeah,
the tight white suit. I thought that was everyone's crush.
yeah, absolutely. And I think no, yeah, she was season one. I know season two was a little different. I think television shows back then were changing things up for their second season. I know we talked about that for Space 1999, which they had a like weird, I guess a weird concept about second seasons. They said our audience saw the first season. We need to change it up, otherwise they're going to watch the same thing they watched in the first season. But it's one of the reasons that people like coming back to a show because it's similar
Mhm.
to what they were watching. But yeah,
Now, were
super.
you a Star Trek fan at all?
I was, and I think I wasn't when I was younger, but Star Trek is one of those shows that I think I examined a lot of the philosophy of Star Trek as I was as I was growing older and more mature and really thinking about the themes that Star Trek presented in a kind of a sci-fi envelope. But yeah, I think there's kind of an urban legend that says that if you like Star Wars, then there's absolutely no way you can like Star Trek. But I think I've my geek card has both Star franchises on both
Yeah,
sides.
me too. Yeah. Well, I mean, my brother, he's much older than me, so he was a Star Trek fan and wasn't a lesser of a Star Wars fan, but I probably would be like, I would call myself like next generation Star Trek fan. And I'm enjoying, like, I'm on third season of Picard. I
Ugh,
think it's great. Like, I saw your post about that.
yeah,
And yeah, so I'm totally down for it.
absolutely. Yeah, we love that stuff. So let's talk costumes. one of the things,
Sure.
one of the things that I remember, this was, well, when I went to a Star Wars The Power of Costume exhibit at the museum in St. Petersburg. This was what, 2017? Yeah, Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg, Florida. And it was such a great exhibit. And I know you talked about exhibits when costumes kind of travel.
Hmm.
There was Black Panther exhibit that recently traveled. Oh, and I was going to ask you, have you ever been to conventions, to fan conventions?
I've been we have Fan Expo in Toronto. I've been to that like 3 times. I've actually I was kind of crazy. I just took my microphone down there and started just stop people on the street.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
I got
actually,
a press pass. I got a press pass, and then
yeah,
I went in and I would just stop people and I'd be like, "Sorry, hey, do you want to talk to me?" So if they were all dressed up, yeah, that's what I would do. So it was really fun.
absolutely. That's how I started the podcast from Star Wars Celebration here in Chicago in 2019. But we have a fan expo coming in August, so that should be a lot of fun. But it is fun. What did you think of the costumes, the cosplayers?
A lot of them are really good. Like
Yeah,
and I'd see the same people that I would get to know them. But our fan expo is also in August, and then I think they do a smaller one in the winter. But no, I think they're really good. I'm always like blown away, and I've actually interviewed some cosplayers that I've just met on online, and I'm always like completely blown away by what they do.
yeah, absolutely. Obviously we've got the 501st, we've got the Mando Mercs, the
Mhm.
Rebel Legion, which are more formally organized cosplayer groups. But really, a lot of the you get families to dress up like members of Ghostbusters or Star Wars Rebels, and it's really great to see the work that is put into these costumes, because 9 times out of 10 they're visually stunning. The material that and it's funny because throughout the years I think 3D printing has really changed the face of cosplay, because really you can kind of program your 3D printer to kind of, if you need something specific, you can just make it yourself and you don't have to kind of look for it or find it.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I went to this one exhibit and it was of a college, and this girl was dressed up like Wonder Woman, and she had 3D printed pretty much most aspects of her costume. And then she told me she went to college, and at the college they had a 3D printer, and a lot of the students were able to use the printer. So I thought that was really cool. But I know a lot of students now, or not students, but cosplayers will buy their own 3D printers
Sure.
and do it. But they'll use all kinds of really interesting products like Warbla, like the molding their own armor. And some of the cosplayers will even do what's called screen accurate. So they'll track down the exact materials that were used in the costumes and make it basically as it would be appearing on screen. So that's
Yeah.
always like pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then, a lot of the 501st, I mean, you have costumes that are probably like way better than what you see on screen, because they
Mhm.
really put work into it. They add lights to it. It's fantastic. I wanted to ask you, I mentioned 3D printers, but what other aspects of cosplay technology that you have seen do you think kind of changed the game for cosplayers? Is there like a
I think probably
fabric or?
Yeah, I think first of all, social media's really helped because then a lot of them can like share their own techniques. Like that's one thing I've noticed. A lot of them they're posting everything that they're doing. They're sharing all of their techniques. They're doing tutorials online, and then you can follow it. And but also like there was this really great show. I can't remember what it was called, but it's they actually had a cosplayer in it, and I thought that was so cool. I was like, there was an actual cosplayer, and she made a Dalek costume for the convention that was in the story, and I thought that
Okay.
was really really neat. And then she goes to a cosplay convention, and so you're even starting to see cosplayers as part of like pop culture now.
Sure. Yeah. Um, yeah, it was what's that song? It's hip to be square. Now it's definitely hip to be square. I think
It is. I mean, some
the
of them are making a living at it. They
sure.
actually,
Yeah.
they can make a living at it
Yeah.
with
Photo
all their
sessions,
appearances that they do.
appearances.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think I think geeks have come a long way to be I guess accepted in general population as it were. But yeah, everybody wants a piece of the nerds now.
Yeah,
Good
the
for them.
nerds have found their place in the world, I think,
Yeah.
for
You know,
sure.
it might have been the other way around. I think regular people kind of have been absorbed into our culture. We have not stopped being nerds. I think we won.
We did. Revenge of the Nerds.
Absolutely. All right. So I mentioned that we both picked 5 costumes or
Mhm.
5 styles of epic movie costumes, and I really wanted to kind of dissect them in a way that will give our audience something to think about. And absolutely, Megan, nerds rule the world. Absolutely. But let's get to the first costume. I don't know if it's one of my selections or one of yours, but let's check it out.
Sure.
All right. So here we have Deckard, Harrison Ford, Blade Runner. Tell me a little bit about why you selected this costume.
Okay, well, first of all, I was going to say, when you said, okay, Heidi, come to me with 5 of your favorite costumes, I'm like, oh my gosh. But I guess I was sort of like, I wanted to come up with costumes that I think are not only for me that I absolutely love, but are also kind of like, iconic. And as I was mentioning to you earlier, when I saw Star Wars at the age of 10, I think I was 16 when I saw Blade Runner, saw it in the theater. Again, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
This is the most amazing movie of all time that I've ever seen. And I was already a big Harrison Ford fan, but it was funny. I'll just tell you a quick little story. When I first met my husband, we went on a date. We went up for margaritas, and I said to him, "Hey, like, what's your favorite movie?" And he's like, "Oh my God, that's such a hard question to answer. I don't know." He says, "Well, I guess if I'd had to pick one, it would be Blade Runner." And I went, Blade Runner, that's my favorite movie. And then, then we got married. So,
The rest
so,
is history.
okay. So, and there's so many great costumes in Blade Runner, but, I chose this one because obviously Deckard is the protagonist in the movie. And it's sort of like a 1940s film noir, sort of, but with a futuristic, like, aspect of these set in the future.
Sure.
So he's sort of, loosely based upon the gumshoes of the 40s, like the private dick kind of thing. And so they've given him sort of a futuristic. They were sort of saying it's sort of like a Humphrey Bogart, the Maltese Falcon or that type of thing. But the one thing, and I was going to mention this, because we're going to be going to a different costume later. One thing Harrison Ford said when he was cast in this role, he did not want to wear a fedora. Charles Node, who did the costume design for this, had originally designed this sort of futuristic trench coat with a fedora, like a private detective. And he said, I don't want to wear that because I've just come off this other movie called Indiana Jones, where I wear a fedora for the whole time, right? So they ditched the fedora. The other thing, though, that he did is he cut his hair. He went out and cut his hair after he did Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he did that without telling Ridley Scott. So Ridley Scott was pissed that he did that, gave himself this haircut. So what else I wanted to say about it is that actually I had this really great quote about this. Oh yeah, here it is. So Charles Node, who's the costume designer, who also did Braveheart, by the way, he said it was redefining that what a futuristic trench coat would look like and what his one suit would look like. Production. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So the trick is not to go too far, is what Ridley Scott said. So they basically gave him the trench, which he pretty much wears the whole movie. They give him a sack suit, but it's actually just really a jacket and pants that don't really match. And he had 2 shirts, and I think he had 1 tie. So he's really wearing pretty much one costume through the whole movie. So it had to really make a statement. So to kind of like make it a little bit more contemporary or modern, they added some like sort of techniques to the jacket, like some of the ribbing. on the collar, and of course it could flip up, you know, against the terrible acid rain. And I think the costume, I think the coat, I think was cotton, but it looked like it had like the waterproofing put on it, like you would have on a gabardine trench coat type thing. Yeah, and then the coat, this is really, we were talking earlier what happens to the costumes. The coat was actually auctioned off. I think Harrison Ford donated it, and then they auctioned it off for 9,500 pounds. That's what it went for at the time.
Wow.
When I did a video on Blade Runner, I got actually a really great email from someone who had bought the puffy outfit that Tyrell wears, you know, the guy who owns the corporation. He's in his bed wearing this giant puffy coat. He told me he had bought that coat, and I was like,
wow.
oh my God. So I've had a lot of really great comments from Blade Runner fans over the years.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, so that's my costume for that one.
That's awesome. You know, it's funny. Harrison Ford has an interesting history with hats and his hair. During the filming of American Graffiti, George wanted him to get a haircut because his character Falfa, I guess, was pictured with shorter hair, and Harrison didn't want to cut his hair because he wasn't sure how long he was going to be in this movie. And he decided to just wear a cowboy hat for American Graffiti. And it's funny that he cuts his hair in this, and then the director, you know, gets upset because of that. But it's Harrison's got
him and Ridley were not on good terms on this movie. I think a lot of people know that.
Yeah.
So there was definitely some friction happening there, and they've made up since then, though, right? Because they went on to do another movie together.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, Blade Runner, obviously, in the I guess in the groupings as far as science fiction fans, I mean, Blade Runner definitely has its fans. It's has turned into a cult classic. It's funny, I've got a DVD with the DVD has 27 versions of it, because it's been edited and re-edited by the studio and the director, and re-edited, and
I have like a 5-cut director's cut. Like it's my husband and I bought it for each other. It came in like a little Deckard briefcase, and it came with a unicorn, and so there's 5 like versions of the movie in that set that we bought.
It's very romantic, by the way.
I know someone asked if we had a wedding. No, but you know what? For my husband's 50th birthday, we threw him a Blade Runner birthday party, and we made a Blade Runner cake, and it was like an owl with a blinking eye. It was it was crazy. It was really funny.
That's awesome.
I actually kind of think that's sort of true about Blade Runner is Coruscant. Coruscant. Sorry, I think that's kind of true.
Yeah. Oh, Charles' comment here.
Yeah, I think, well, I think a lot, if you look at actually a lot of contemporary movies and shows now that are set in the future, for sure, they're totally inspired. That's Sid Mead, who's the production designer, art director on the show. He was on the movie.
Yeah, I mean, even movies like Metropolis that from 1936, I think. Just when you talk about futuristic cities, it's just it's almost like Coruscant, just heavy city buildings, as far as the eye can see. And obviously Blade Runner and Coruscant from Star Wars really portrays that fairly well. Yeah, excellent. Were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, speaking of Coruscant, I was going to say that what's that latest show, that the Star Wars show that was out recently?
Mandalorian?
No, not the Mandalorian. What's the one that takes place in Coruscant? It takes place all over, but
Andor?
Andor, sorry, yes. Yeah. Andor, personally, I think is probably one of the best costume designs I've seen in a Star Wars show. Like, it is phenomenal.
I was just talking with somebody about that exact thing.
I thought the whole show was amazing, but I thought the costume design, and he didn't, and I was kind of sad because the designer didn't get any accolades for it. And I was talking to another designer about it, and she said, she says, I don't know what happened. Sometimes, she said, it's sometimes the people who are nominating, and there's a bit of a club, I guess. So it's like who's who kind of thing. And he is a recognized designer, but he just doesn't get, he didn't get any accolades. So I thought that was awful because I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, I really enjoyed. I really loved the coats, the overcoats that the Imperials wore, and really their outfits are really really well designed and beautiful to look at. But the entire show, the entire series was wonderful to look at, for sure.
One of my friends in the YouTube community told me he went to like some kind of sort of fan expo type thing in England, and the designer was there, and a bunch of people showed up wearing the prison outfits, and he was
Oh,
like speechless. He couldn't even believe it because that's one
yeah.
of my favorite because it's sort of like a THX,
Yes,
reference.
yeah.
And I watched that movie when I was a kid as well, which again I think is sort of crazy that I was like a kid watching that movie. But I was like, I have to go back and watch all of George Lucas's movies. So I watched American Graffiti. I watched that one, his first film, and so yeah, for sure, there's like an homage to that, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. All right, let's get to the next costume, which I think was one of my selections, and
It is.
that is Batman. So the one reason I wanted to really talk about Batman is there's a lot of symbolism in the outfit of Batman, and I think it wasn't there to begin with, but I think as the character got a little darker and as the movies became what they became, that were kind of separated from the campiness of the 60s and even the Joel Schumacher movies, I think Batman has become a character that really represents, we call him the Dark Knight, but now he's really dark. In other words, but you take a look at the symbolism of the bat. You've got the bat signal, obviously overhead, when Commissioner Gordon calls for him, but just the icon of the bat against a background is pretty recognizable throughout. Throughout fans, whether you love superhero movies or not. If you can see the silhouette of Batman in any of these outfits, you know exactly who you know exactly what the character is. And I think kudos to the designers. And I know Batman has gone through a lot of different reboots and redesigns. There's 4 of them up here, obviously from Adam West all the way down to the current Batman. But I think at its core, the costume for Batman, I want to say, kind of stays in that same neighborhood of instilling fear. There's that darkness, obviously, but I think Batman is one of those iconic costumes that if you go outside the principal design of Batman, he no longer is Batman. And I know Batman has different outfits. We see kind of like the metallic looking outfit with the white eyes. Again, from the Miller the comic books. But Batman is definitely one of those costumes that is very iconic and recognizable all throughout, not just the United States, but even in Canada.
Oh yes, we know who Batman is. I'm a superhero movie watcher. I'm not a comic like I'm not a comic person, but I am definitely like we were talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. By the way, I just saw that in the theater. Fantastic. Loved
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Definitely iconic. One of the things you were saying, it's gotten darker over the years. I think I've just noticed that in general for all superhero costumes. They've all kind of gotten
Yeah,
darker. So like, Superman would be, red and blue, like sort of American colors. And now it's kind of become more like
muted.
muted or more maroon. And obviously, and I do kind of think it's interesting. Is that Robert Pattinson on the right?
Yes.
So it's more, that almost is less, sort of naturalistic curves of like the abs. It's kind of, they've made it look more structured. So it's sort of
Right.
interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting evolution that they've done. Whereas the Adam West is almost cartoonish a bit.
Sure. Yeah. And again, just I think superhero shows, especially in the 60s, it was more tongue-in-cheek campiness.
Agreed. I mean, they even
Obviously,
had like the little, didn't they have the little like, kapow and like the
yeah, just
little
very comic
balloon.
booky,
Yeah,
right?
it's campy, exactly.
Yeah,
Eartha Kitt was sort of very, yeah, it was super
sure.
campy.
But it's
Burgess
funny though,
Meredith.
because there's a lot of but obviously there's a fan base for the Batman of the '60s, and you mentioned Eartha Kitt. I mean, these actors
Mhm.
came into their respective roles with great respect. You have Cesar Romero that played the Joker back in the day, and you ask anybody who their ultimate favorite Joker is. I mean, it's either Cesar Romero really or um, um, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. Heath Ledger.
Yeah, I was gonna say Heath Ledger.
Yeah, but
Yeah. But what about Joaquin Phoenix now?
yeah, people mention that. I
Hmm.
think
But that's not a traditional like Batman movie, so maybe.
yeah. But yeah, absolutely. And the Robert Pattinson Batman um you made an interesting observation, because I think the Pattinson Batman is almost like a prequel to the Batmans. They this particular incarnation of Batman is early on in his career. There were mentions, there were hints of this being kind of like his first year being Batman, harkening back to a comic book story arc of the Dark Knight. It's called Year One. So it's interesting, and I love. There's a certain aspect of this costume in particular. If you notice, let me zoom this up. The bat symbol in Patterson's chest, I think originally there were some internet rumors that were saying that was the gun that killed his mother in the story, that he kind of was able
Oh,
to take it apart and then create that shape almost as a reminder, a branding, if you will, of his pain and his emotion,
yeah.
which I don't think they confirmed for the most part,
Yeah,
but
I almost thought it looked like two hands sort of like like shaking,
yeah.
you know.
Mhm.
But now, since you're talking about this, what do you think about the nipples on the armor, Batman, George Clooney Batman?
Yeah, well,
You don't have a
my
picture of him there.
one of my co-hosts, I always tease her about the latex nipples on the Batman. So we're all for it.
Yeah, well, it's
It's
funny because
interesting.
there's been situations where I get into discussions with people about boob armor or nipples on armor and things like
Yeah.
that. So there's always that's that's going to be probably a thing that's going to go on for ages.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone's never going to be happy about that.
Is it necessary?
Well, I don't know if you're into fantasy at all, but George Martin always says that he'll use something like that's as useless as nipples on armor.
Right,
So it's not necessarily. It's just an aesthetic thing, right? Because
right.
the Romans used to wear like sculpted armor, but it would be just sort of to intimidate their opponent, not
Sure.
necessarily to
To protect
provide
your
better
nipples.
protection. Yeah. So it's not really necessary. I've argued about this sort of on some of my medieval movie shows that I do a analysis of, that sometimes actually having those grooves in there be and can actually be a problem with weapons
Mm,
because they don't glide off. So but with a superhero it's kind of different because
sure. Yeah.
you're not going to have swords and things like that. But
Yeah.
when you're talking about medieval, then it's a little bit different.
That's too funny. Yeah.
Yes, a screen door in a submarine. That's a great one.
Yeah.
I want to use that.
But yes, the controversy of the latex nipples continues. It'll
For
never
sure.
die. All right. So the next costume we have up is, and I forgot her name, Layla or
Lilu.
Lilu.
Yeah, actually, it was funny because I just sort of gave you the pictures and I didn't tell you who anybody was, but you sort of figured it out.
Yeah. I mean, being a fan of sci-fi,
Yeah. So
like Fifth Element.
the fifth element, yes. So this this is another movie. I went to see it. I actually saw it at a movie, like at a drive-in. It was in the summer, and I went to see this movie, and it had like everything that I absolutely love in the movie. It had action, it had like a love story, it had things blowing up, it had really cool alien creatures. Um, like an awesome like superhero, like character in it. It was campy. The design was really cool. So the costumes for this were designed by Jean-Paul Gaultier, who's actually a fashion
Oh,
designer, but
wow.
he's
Okay,
done a
cool.
couple of really good movies where he's done design. And the director is French. Luc Besson
Yeah.
was the director. So I picked this one. She has two looks actually. She has like the bandage one. They call it the thermal bandages, which I thought was pretty cool. But she's in the movie mostly wearing this outfit, so I thought it was really great. And I'm trying to think if I'd ever seen Mila Jovovich before this, because she went on to do Resident Evil movies and so on.
Right.
But
She was a supermodel before,
she
right?
was a supermodel,
Yeah.
exactly, and a
Yeah.
musician. So when I first saw this, I was like, this is incredible. Like, I mean, I love the whole movie. Like, I love the McDonald's employees. I love the flight attendants. I love Bruce Willis's, his outfit. But I just thought that this was a really, really great costume. It's iconic. Speaking of cosplay, it's been cosplayed like a
Mhm.
lot. So I don't have too much to say about it, except that there were some interesting things that happened during the making of this movie. Like they actually had to shut down at one point because they didn't have they were having financing issues. It kept going over budget. And so the studio was like, okay, we're shutting this down, and then to let them get more money. So in the meantime, before he had actually brought in the two guys who did Metal Hurlant, which is like a French comic book, and he brought them in. So the designer, the two concept artists that were brought in, they did a lot of the concept work even before it started going to production. And then Jean-Paul Gaultier got brought in not too long before they went to camera. And so he was like sort of coming up with some sketches and everything. So he actually put something together, but it was actually the concept artist. His name was like Jean-Claude Mézières, who actually kind of came up with this look. And then Jean-Paul Gaultier and his team, they made it. So it's like basically like a spandex pant with a crop top, and then like this rubber I call it kind of like a thong. It's kind of like, it's like sort of, I don't even know what you would call a mallet. I'm not quite sure what you call it. And she's wearing boots with it. So one of the things though that Mila Jovovich said though is that the rubber, she called it the orange rubber section of her costume. She said it became problematic because it kept shifting out of place. So each morning the wardrobe would sew the piece directly to her costume so that it would lie flat and stay in place. Because it does look kind of awkward, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And the other thing
not
is
very comfortable.
not very comfortable. No, it's just to do all these action sequences and everything.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, when Jean-Paul Gaultier originally designed it, he kind of had her in a bra top, which I don't think that would have been very practical. And so they gave her this little kind of crop top as well. Because there's this one really funny scene where she ends up in the shower, and like, and then because he's trying to hide her, so he puts her in the shower, and then she gets out, and he gets a towel out, and she takes her top off, and she's like wringing it out, and they're all like, "Oh my god!" They're turning around, like, because they want to give her privacy, kind of thing. So there's just some humor in there. And then regarding her hair, she said, Mila Jovovich said that it was actually Luc Besson's idea, but some of the early concept artwork has her with red hair. So I think that there was quite a bit of early talk about her having that hair. And then, so at the beginning they dyed it, but then her hair started kind of falling out from the bleaching and then the over dyeing. And then finally they just had to do a wig for her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was her hair at the beginning, but then they had to, and I just think she's just, absolutely stunning in the movie.
Yeah. It's funny when you sent me this picture, I tried to look for a better resolution version of this picture. And for some reason I couldn't find any. I couldn't find a really good still shot.
I couldn't either. I have
Right.
some cropped ones of her in it. I have, but I could not find like a full body picture of her. So unfortunately, sometimes the studios don't take good pictures of them in the costume. They know now to do that, by the way.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
They know
for
now
sure.
to do that.
Yeah. You mentioned Gautier, and
Mhm.
are there any other like really famous designers, fashion designers that have entered the costume world for filmmaking for movies that come to mind?
Yeah, Tom Ford actually, Tom Ford has actually not only just designing, but he's also a director, and he does basically pretty much every Bond movie. He does
Oh,
the Bond clothing at any rate. He does all the Bond clothes, and then they might have another designer doing the other parts. But yeah, and I'm trying to think of anybody else that has done this. Um, I can't think of anybody else. Like Julie Taymor, she's a director. She also does costumes. But I don't know if that's a good example, but there probably are a few more, like, I'll have to think
yeah,
about it. But
yeah.
he's
I
for
think
sure I've
that's
seen
cool.
all his films. So he did The Cook, the Thief, the Lover, and her lover and his wife or
Yeah.
whatever,
Hmm.
City of Lost Children. He's done a lot of, this, The Skin You're In, I think it's called, like some horror movies. It's a
Oh,
really interesting body of work.
Charles has Armani did Untouchables.
Oh, yes, thank you,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And a lot of costume designers, or sorry, a lot of fashion designers, they do go to the fashion designers. Like for instance, if you guys watch like especially contemporary shows, they will go to the fashion designers and the fashion designers. Oh, actually, here's an example. Givenchy did a lot of the costumes worn, like say in Breakfast at Tiffany's. He worked closely with Audrey Hepburn on a lot of the movies she was in, Sabrina. So they would have a costume designer, but then Givenchy would provide the clothing for the leading lady kind of thing.
Yeah, that's cool. We mentioned Armani and a movie like The Untouchables, and I think, coming from a science fiction movie loving background, we don't think about movies that are either period pieces or movies that are kind of set in the modern world, or even like something like The Untouchables that are not like too far in the past, where you still need outfits that existed back then that may not be readily available. You can't just go to Sears or whatever and get a three-piece suit like Al Capone had. These things still had to be designed and constructed, and I think a lot of times we forget about that. We always think about costumes in science fiction and fantasy because they are so bigger than life, but we also have to think about the suits that are designed in movies that may or may not take place in modern day, or a near past or even a near future. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and and honestly, sometimes a contemporary design is even harder. It's like it's harder to do than
Yeah.
say a futuristic world where you're just making it up.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody on on here is watching the new show Silo. I'm having a little bit of an issue with that show. I love it, but I'm having a little bit of an issue with it because one of the things that I always look for is where are they getting the clothing from? Like, there's some, there's some shows I'm watching. Okay, I'm like, this is absolutely ridiculous, but that's always the thing that I look for. I always look for, where are the sources of clothing coming from? Who's making them? What materials are available to these people within the society?
Right.
What are the trade routes? What access to dyes would they have? I always look at that. So in a modern show, it's really not that much different. It's just that they would probably go out to, uh, a shopping mall to buy their
Yeah.
clothing, but they're
Right.
still telling the story of the characters through their costumes.
Yeah, and I that's one of the cool things when I was reading about your shows and how you kind of break that down. I think we I think we take for granted what costumes tell us in movies. And maybe not so much sci-fi and fantasy, because costumes are part of the tapestry of the storytelling in those franchises. But something like something like Peaky Blinders, for example. These are the
Great costumes in that
right,
show, by the way.
great costumes, absolutely wonderful costumes, and I love the fact that these costumes really allow the actors to kind of get into the feeling of the character. and they're part of the world building tools that directors have to kind of, not only transport us to that world, but the actors as well. And I think it's it's always fun to play dress up and pretend, but when you're doing it, both of them both at the same time, that's got to be icing on the cake.
Actually, Ro, that's a really great point that you're making about the actor, because absolutely it can actually change the experience of the actor.
Yeah.
I've read many times that the actor will say, I'm in a fitting, I'm trying on these different outfits. I get into this outfit that, because sometimes they'll try on multiple costumes. They'll get into it and they'll be like, this is it.
Yeah.
And then they'll walk onto set and they'll be like,
Different.
like Loki, for instance. I'm in my Loki outfit. I like feel like I'm Loki now. You know
Right.
what I mean? It's
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
so no, for sure. It definitely helps the actor. And I think sometimes it doesn't get the credit it deserves, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Fifth Element. And let's go to the next one. All right. These people are familiar. We talked about Star Trek. And I did want to I think I picked the original cast of the original series, because I think for the most part, obviously these costumes are very iconic. They also have a very kind of funny in joke where whoever's wearing a red outfit on an away mission, they're surely dead within the first 5 minutes of their away mission. But the colors for these costumes are colorful, and obviously they're kind of a split between I guess ranks of the Federation when we're talking about the show. Oh, Megan is upset because I'm talking Star Trek and not Star Wars. Wrong,
Oh,
sorry.
yeah. Now I have to be honest. I don't know too much about these outfits. I have seen some of the pictures of the outfits at auction, so I've seen some details. But I think this is one of the first cases that I can recall of like color blocking.
Mhm.
Like you were saying, using color to sort of help you identify who someone is.
Right.
I mean, they're all wearing black pants, or the ladies aren't. They're wearing dresses, but they all wear the same bottoms, but they have that different color top. And I think that sort of carried through the series. Like, I mean, that's pretty amazing when you think about that.
Sure. Yeah. And I think later on in the series, like in the movies and some of the newer TV shows, they kind of flip-flopped, like from the Next Generation to this show. Gold in the original series, gold was used to represent command. And then you had blue, which was science and medical. And then engineering with the red. I think when it came to the 90s or the late 80s, when the Next Generation started, they switched things around, and I think red represented command, and they flip-flopped a little bit. But yeah, it was part of their identity. It was part of who they were as characters, these actors, when they put on the outfits.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
like I'm thinking, like, for instance, just looking at this, it reminds me of the Star Trek with Chris Pine. I think they went with the exact same colors. I could be wrong, but
No,
he's dark.
you're absolutely right, because
Yeah.
the time era where the Chris Pine show
Mhm.
exists is very close to the original series time area.
Yeah, they just gave it a bit of a different texture or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
One of the things that kind of cracked me up though about these outfits is, and they wouldn't have had the budgets, obviously, but when I was looking at a picture of them close up, there's this thing called rickrack, which is like a zigzag trim, and they use gold rickrack on the cuffs of the sleeves, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
kind of cracked me up because it's like it would be like $1 for a roll. Like that's
Yeah,
how much
yeah,
it would cost nowadays.
yeah.
It's cheap, right? So they did kind of have to use but one thing I have to say about Gene Roddenberry is he kind of came out with this edict of having no fasteners. There's no visible fasteners on any Star Trek costume that I can think of, like uniform, I should say.
Yeah.
So everything's hidden. And that was sort of a Gene Roddenberry thing that he came up with. I know I've heard he's a terrible person, but that's pretty amazing. And that's kind of followed through Star Wars. Like if you look at Star Wars, you won't see any visible fasteners on the uniforms, at least the Imperial that I can think of.
Well, it's interesting because early in the year there was some controversy about zippers in Star Wars, and the fandom got the certain groups of fans got all in a tizzy about zippers in Star Wars. That and bricks and screws, but that's another story.
So which Star Wars was it that there were zippers?
Well, they were, people like to complain about the new / Disney Star Wars and how Disney doesn't understand original trilogy Star Wars. But in The Empire Strikes Back, the Luke Skywalker puts on a jumpsuit and he's clearly zipping the jumpsuit. So there are zippers in Star Wars. So
yeah,
so
no
there.
visible, well, I'm thinking like the Imperial. At least in terms of like Star Wars, my understanding is if you look at the Imperial, you won't see any visible. But yeah, exactly. There's a in a jumpsuit for sure. Okay, point taken. Yeah, so they're probably just forgetting their own canon.
Right. That never happens. Here's a question from Charles for you, Heidi. Are you able to step away from the details of costumes to be able to enjoy it as a whole?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, for sure. In fact, sometimes I get so lost in a story, I don't even notice the costumes, which I have to say that's actually a pretty good thing. If you don't notice the costumes in a show when you're watching it, it would be the same with like if you're watching a show, you don't notice music or you don't notice the set design or whatever.
Or the special effects.
The special effects, that's actually excellent. That means that they've done an amazing job. But like something like Andor has so many fantastic outfits. Like it was like watching a runway show. I couldn't help but like notice them. You know what I mean? So it is a bit of a double-edged sword in that way.
Yeah.
But like a show like I'm watching right now, I'm watching Yellow Jackets. And, I'd be hard pressed to kind of tell you what everyone was wearing. At least, or I don't know, Stranger Things or something. I probably wouldn't be able to tell you what they were wearing.
Yeah.
But so unless something really stands out to me, but sometimes what I do, and I don't notice it until I actually sit down and go through some of the larger high-res photos and zoom in. That's when I really kind of notice things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Similar question, I guess, from my friend Dave Richards. Can I step away from the tech to enjoy? So I was going to ask you, Heidi, because the way I watch movies, I watch it in stages. Like first, I'll watch it as a fan to kind of absorb everything that is being shown to me. And then, if I watch it again the second or third time, that's when my technical brain starts to take over. Is the shot composed right? Why did the director choose to put the camera over here? The technical aspect of movie making for me, and again, it is definitely a double-edged sword because I can watch a movie with my wife and she'll be like, "Oh my God, that's so disgusting. Oh my God." And I'm thinking it's not real. I keep having to remind people that I watch movies. I'm kind of like the annoying guy sitting next to him. I'm like, you know what? That's CGI, or this is the way they did this shot. But I can't help it to be able to watch a movie like that. It's a blessing and a curse, as they say.
Yeah, well, it was terrible. Like I watched, I think 5 seasons of The Expanse with my husband, and I just turned to him and go, "What's going on here?" Like I constantly would be like, "I don't understand," or and he'd have to explain things to me. But I thought the costumes in that, by the way, are amazing.
Expanse, yeah, totally.
Hi, Tina. Thank you so
See you,
much.
Tina. Thank you for stopping by. Yeah, okay, so let's get to the next costume, which is one of your selections.
Yes. Okay. So someone was asking about Logan's Run. And it's funny. I thought about having Logan's Sandman outfit. And I don't know why. It's one of those things. It depended on my mood. And maybe I thought I should have a few female, a few male kind of thing. So I decided to go with Jessica. And she has this other one that's really sexy. But I kind of like this one because this is the one that she wears when they escape the City of Domes. And the other thing is, I was thinking about this the other day, that the outfit she's wearing here is also the same like sort of silhouette. It's the exact same version that is worn in the TV series, except they have her in pink. So I thought that was important too. So so the costume designer for this was Bill Thomas. He was a pretty big deal. He did a lot of Disney movies back in the 70s and so on. So here's another movie that I watched. I think this one I saw on TV, to be honest with you. I don't think I saw it in the theater. It was pretty adult. So it was one of those, I've stayed up late, my parents don't know I'm watching it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Totally loved it. Was obsessed with this movie when it came out. And it's funny, I did a video on the movie and I had I can't, we were talking earlier about men who are obsessing about a particular actress during a time period.
Yeah.
I had so many men say I was in love with Jenny Agutter, who played Jessica Six here. And she was stunning. Honestly, you could have put her in a brown paper bag or something and she would have looked amazing. So basically the outfit's really simple. It's just like a little tunic. I sort of look at this society of Logan, of sort of like this future world that's in Logan's Run, this dystopia, as being sort of like a hedonistic society. So the designer was sort of talking about how the outfits had to be because they're kind of you can go on, you put yourself on a holodeck or whatever it's called, and you can have threesomes with people or orgies, or you can go to the orgy room, or so he had this idea that he wanted people to be able to slip in and out of their clothes really easily. So when Logan is off duty, he's not wearing his Sandman uniform. He's just wearing sort of like a caftan or something, which is very 1970s. So I look at these as being sort of almost like Grecian style, very, very minimal. And apparently I had some of the people who played background in this movie messaged me. Apparently the outfits were like this awful, polyester. And it was stinking hot in the summertime. So they were all sweating. If you see any picture of Michael York, he's always sweating because it was just they were in Texas in the summer shooting at a shopping mall. Yes. Thank you, Megan. The other thing is, and this is very 1970s, they didn't wear undergarments. So the women didn't wear any bras. They wore pantyhose, but no bras and no panties, apparently. Although there is one scene with Jessica where you can see her wearing panties for this one scene. But the other thing is that she's wearing this necklace with the Ankh on it, which is very important. She's got the Ankh. That's very important to sanctuary, the symbol of sanctuary. And I love this belt she's wearing. She's wearing sort of a wrap tie belt, but she's got this very cool spiral, sort of like Club 54, 1970s, sort of discotheque kind of feel to it. Yeah. So in fact, I found this picture of Farrah Fawcett. If anybody hasn't seen this movie, Farrah Fawcett was in this movie. She played Holly, who works in the beauty salon where they do they can change your face and make you look like you're a different person. And I found this picture of Farrah Fawcett at Club 54 wearing sort of an outfit like this. It was sort of off the shoulder and very Halston, which was a big designer in the 1970s. So, so I love this costume. Her hair and her makeup is very 1970s. It's very timely of that period, which is something you see a lot of costumes in period films. You'll notice that even if it's supposed to be 18th century, their hair and their makeup will oftentimes look they're in the 70s or 80s or wherever the time period was. So her makeup and hair are definitely 1970s in this.
Take a look at Star Wars. Obviously shot in 76 and you had all the guys with the sideburns and the hair, these hair.
And I think this movie was released as sort of a way to kind of capitalize off of or it was either came out the year before, the year after, but they were trying to sort of ride that wave of science fiction.
Yes.
But it just didn't do as well in the box office.
Right. And this might actually be where George Lucas got the idea of telling Princess Leia or Carrie Fisher that there is no underwear in space.
Yeah. I just, that whole story, that whole thing just cracks me right up. I don't even know what to say about that. It was funny because I just did an interview with this designer. She did a movie that's set in the 1970s. So I said to her, okay, let me know if you want to answer this question. If you don't, that's totally cool. But I said to her, what did you do regarding undergarments, you know? And she said, well, we either found like nude underwear, or we would cut it, like we would cut it so that there was no band. And we would use pasties, like we would use nipple covers.
Mm.
So the girls weren't wearing bras, but they would put these things on so that they didn't have to worry, But in these movies, you can tell. Now, in the TV series, apparently, because of the censors, you can get away with things in movies that you can't get away with on TV. So they had to go through all these different iterations of Jessica because the censors were watching, or the producers were watching, go, oh my God, this isn't going to be able to get by the censors. Like, we have to do something about this. So they would try all kinds of different things to get around it, like make the skirt a little bit longer, or put her in a bullet bra, or I don't know, all kinds of different weird things. And, but for the movie itself, like they were able to do some of these things.
Yeah. And it, when you send me this picture, it does, Megan is right. It does give me Leia vibes for sure. The simplicity, the lines, fabric.
Yeah. And I was sort of like, it's funny because I didn't realize this until I went back and looked at some of my writing, but I was comparing this to sort of Halston, and the same with Leia. I think there's a definite Halston through line there. Halston was this, actually they made a movie about him recently starring Ewan McGregor. So he was a very famous 1970s women's clothing designer. And he used a lot of these types of fabrics, like silk jerseys and very drapey type fabrics that would cling to the body. And he would cut them on the bias so that they would sort of drape really nicely. Very, like, that's why I sort of compared it to sort of a Grecian style.
Right.
And sort of a throwback to that. So, and then also that, like, you see, they don't ever do, the edges are never finished off. They're just sort of cut.
Right.
So it's the same with Leia, like a lot of the nothing phrased because it's this particular way that they've cut it. So it does, I think, have a bit of a similar vibe to it. It has even that bit of a mock turtleneck on it,
Yeah, especially what is that, Leia's throne room outfit, the white outfit. But yeah, absolutely. Very sheer, the material that is used. Very nice.
Well, I love Leia's throne room outfit, by the way.
Yeah. Really nice.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, actually, when I was younger, I used to do a lot of drawing, and I did a pointillism drawing of that one when I was probably like 12 years old or something. So yeah, it was beautiful, beautiful costume.
Very nice. Very nice. All right. Next slide. We have one of mine, and the prequels for Star Wars have some amazing costume work by Trisha Bigar, I think is the name of the costume designer. And the costumes that Natalie Portman wore as Queen Amidala are breathtaking, to say the least. I think there is, looking at a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, I mean, Trisha's team traveled the world to acquire all these different types of fabrics, and their behind the scenes story is just amazing. I was lucky enough to buy the book Dressing a Galaxy when it was on retail, and that book is crazy expensive now for some reason. I think it's used by a lot of cosplayers to really, fine tune their costumes, but it is in high demand. I think the lowest I've seen that book is like $800. It's amazing.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
But yeah, Queen Amidala, I mean, I think Natalie Portman wears something completely different in every scene that she's in for this character. I think you can really tell the difference in the material. I know a lot of costume material is, sometimes visually you can tell that it's kind of I don't want to say cheap, but you can really tell the heaviness and the structure of the material in these outfits.
Yeah, it is amazing. I just I don't know if your viewers or watch House of the Dragon, but one of my issues with House of the Dragon that I personally had is that, these people are supposed to be a royal house and they're royalty. And Queen Amidala, you can definitely see that, right? You can see it right away.
Right.
There's a weight to it. There's a gravitas to it. It was really, it was really funny. I saw this picture. I think it was yesterday. It was of King Charles and Camilla, and someone said it looked like they were cosplaying. And I was like, my critique of them would be the exact same way I critiqued House of the Dragon. It would be that I didn't feel that the weight of the materials represented what it should have been of someone of that stature. It should have been like, really, really heavy weighted. Like this company I used to work for, we did a reproduction of Queen Amidala, the one on the right.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, the gown, like the red, that's silk velvet. And the way that they get those sort of circles is they like silk velvet. It is evil. You can easily leave an impression on it, like by just doing anything. It's so delicate. So what they do is they sort of press these sort of shapes onto it, and that's how you get that sort of texture. And I mean, that was really clever, I think. But then the fact that they've mixed it with so many other, like there's probably at least in the one on the right, there's probably like 5 fabrics going on there at least. But then also the, all of the trim and the embellishments as well. And of course the headpiece is just crazy.
Yeah. And, I know there were some comparisons to these costumes with some older Native American headdresses, which George Lucas, kind of took inspiration to that when it came to designing the headpieces for the character.
Well, the one on the right, I was going to tell you this. So years ago, I was working with this woman, and she was from Siberia, and she had a book from where she came from. She was from the small town called Irkutsk, and she said, "Do you want to see this book, Heidi? It's from my hometown." I said, "Sure." So I started going through it, and there was a folk costume in it, and it was Queen Amidala, the one on the right.
Yeah.
The cylinders hanging down.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, that's Queen Amidala.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at some of the background players in the audience, like in the stands, like when young Darth Vader is he's racing,
right?
You can see that they're wearing those typical headdresses and everything. So yeah, no, for sure, they took a lot of inspiration from other cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think is great. I think one thing I wanted to mention is I find it fascinating that costume designers really, I think good costume designers really take their job seriously when it comes to finding a history for this character's clothing. It's not just, okay, design a dress, make a dress, here it is. But like you said, I think some people really look for that history when they're watching movies, when they're watching shows like this. Does it make sense in universe? And I think for a lot of people, that may not register consciously, but it registers subconsciously, and it gives you, I guess, the ability to accept or deny the history of the character through costumes and other things, of course. But I think costumes really has a really good connection when it comes to the character and how that history has kind of developed. Especially as an audience member, just getting into the story, at the point where you enter the story. But somebody like Trisha Bigger, who designed a lot of costumes in the prequels, there's a lot of effort that went into research and design and giving, even the history of a lot of the trim that is put on these costumes. I mean, the one on the far left here, facing this image, there's kind of like a gold lattice pattern to it, which there's a lot of detail in her costumes in general.
And I think that those orbs light up, if I recall, those round sort of orbs. Yeah, I have to say, like, to do a production like this would take a village, like really it does. And this is one thing I've noticed when I've been talking to designers, like, you'll have the costume designer, they may have like 3 assistant designers, but then there's a team of buyers and fabricators and dyers and, people who do headdresses, millinery, footwear, like all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It really, like a show like that, there is so much love that's put into it, and you can see it.
Yeah.
I'm an original trilogy lover. I mean, everything was much simpler then, but I was just looking up this the other day. Sorry, let me see if I can find it, what the budget was for the. So, when you get to this show, I don't know what the budget on that movie was, but where is it here? I had it. Okay, so for Star Wars, the original costume budget for the entire film of Star Wars was $300,000, which in today's dollars would be like 1.2 million. So just to give you perspective, in comparison, the budget for Rogue One was 21 million.
Yeah.
So it was like almost 20 times as much. So that's pretty incredible. So
Yeah.
by the time you get to this movie, I don't know what the budget was, but they had some money.
Yeah,
and you can see
absolutely.
it, and it's on
You-
screen.
yeah.
So
Yeah, you can definitely see it. And I think, again, especially with Star Wars, and I mean, obviously, George didn't know he had a hit on his hands, tried to make, captured lightning in a bottle on all aspects, both, special effects and costumes. But they were very ingenious with the costumes, and the costumes and the props. The lightsaber was an old, flash handle from, photography equipment of the 60s. And it's, there's a lot of people that still try to look for the original, it's called a 3-cell flash handle for photography on eBay, and they deck it out. And, but it's wonderful. It's again,
I don't know if I could do a plug for that, Ro. I actually
plug away.
I got to interview Roger Christian, who is the inventor of the lightsaber.
Yeah.
I think it was like Star Wars Day, like 3 or 4 years ago. And I have to tell you, it was probably the best day of my life.
That's awesome.
It was
That's cool.
amazing. He lives in Toronto, where I live, which is so crazy.
Very nice.
I just happened to find that out. I'm like, you live in Toronto? And so we just did it we just did it through StreamYard. But yeah, the most amazing thing. And what was really nice to talk to him is he also got to share with me some things about John Mallow. So that was so cool.
Very nice. Yeah.
I like John Mallow.
I was just discussing some John Mallow art, especially I've got obviously the art of Return of the Jedi, the art of Star Wars, and a lot of his drawings and sketches are wonderful, wonderful pieces of history with the franchise. And I love just kind of flipping through those old books. A lot of those books, as a young person, I used almost as textbooks, because I really, like I said, I just wanted to absorb as much as I could. Design, style, technique, the technical aspect of stuff behind the scenes. I just wanted to see how it all worked, and what what went into it. And I loved learning about all that stuff as a kid.
So fun. Absolutely agree.
All right. So the next slide we have is this archaeologist.
This guy. Who's that?
There's a fedora.
Now it's funny because I have two Harrison Ford in this. It's funny, and I don't have Han Solo, but of course I adore Han Solo. So Han Solo, however you guys want to say it. Yeah.
It's both of them are correct, I think.
Okay, good. I always say things differently than other people. So I just put this in because, well, first of all, I was pretty sure you were an Indiana Jones lover.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I knew that. And I had done a video years ago called the 10 most iconic men's costumes, and I had this in there. And I think it is. I think it's actually probably easily in the top 10 most iconic men's costumes, even more, I would say, maybe than Han Solo. So, and they're doing their 5th movie. So, proof is in the pudding. So
absolutely.
The costume, this is done, the designer on this was Deborah Nadoolman Landis, and actually she's a professor now, but she also still designs. And she actually did an exhibit recently where she went around kind of trying to find iconic costumes from the years. Some of them were with private collectors, some of them were, in exhibits, and this one she put together. So one of the things that maybe people don't know, well, there's 2 things. One, did you know that Tom Selleck was originally supposed to play Indiana Jones?
Yes, but his Magnum PI contract would not allow him to to be released for those.
Yeah. And then the second thing is this outfit is actually based on another character named Harry Steele from a movie called Secret of the Incas. So it's
Correct.
from 1955
Yeah.
and it starred Charlton Heston. So if you ever see that movie, when you look at it, you'll go, oh, hey, that looks kind of
It's Harrison
familiar.
Ford. Yeah, right. It's
So
Indiana Jones.
he's got the brown leather jacket, he's got the fedora, and actually Deborah Nadelman said that they did watch the movie like with the crew. So Spielberg was obviously inspired by that, but it wasn't really a commercial success or anything, right? It didn't do that well at the box office. So
but it was almost lifted, piece by piece, the outfit. I mean, even the little leather satchel that Indiana Jones carries across his chest.
Yeah, actually, I found this in my notes. So apparently, according to Radar.net, Indy's shoulder bag is actually from the mid 1940s. So it's not a remade prop; it's an existing prop.
Nice.
And they said that these bags were standard issue to everyone in London because the government was concerned that Hitler's attacks might involve poison gas. So as such, hundreds of thousands of these bags were manufactured and issued British military personnel and British civilians during World War II. So that's one thing about that little bag, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And the jacket was actually made. So they didn't buy an existing jacket. They had it made at this place called Berman's and Nathan's in London. Berman's and Nathan's is it's kind of like a big costume house in London, England. It's now called Angels, the Costumers. And I remember I was mentioning earlier that they lost Obi-Wan Kenobi's robe.
Mm-hmm.
And then they found out later that's where they found it, because Angels and Berman's did most of the clothing for Star Wars as well. So they made his leather jacket there, but apparently when it came in, it was still like brand new looking and everything. So Deborah Nadelman, she sanded it down. They were all hanging out apparently the night before the movie was shooting. So she was there with, who they say they were there with? So it was Deborah Nadelman, Steven Spielberg, Harrison Ford, and was it? Where is it here? Can I find it in my notes now? Oh yeah, sorry. So she said they were all sitting around after dinner by the pool. Oh yeah, sorry. Karen Allen was there as well.
Okay.
And she says that Ford was a carpenter and carried a big Swiss Army knife. So she used that and mineral oils to soften it and finish it just hours before the 5 a.m. call time.
Wow.
So they were all kind of sitting around I'd be like, I'm going to go get some sleep.
Yeah.
But, these are Hollywood types, right?
Very exciting.
Yeah. And then what was the other thing I was going to tell you about his fedora? You can still get that fedora, by the way. It was made by Herbert Johnson Hat Shop in Savile Row, London. So the hat was the shop's poet model. So you can still get that hat, by the way, if anyone wants to buy it. This is on the bonus features of the DVD. Nadelman said that in order to properly age the hat, she grabbed and twisted it. Then she and Harrison Ford both sat on it and eventually looked like a very lived-in and well-loved hat. So they broke it down organically. It was the same with Obi-Wan. Apparently Alec Guinness just rolled around in the sand and the dirt, and that's how he got his robe dirty.
Wow, that's so cool. Yeah.
And then the last thing a little bit I have for you is about the whip. So Indy's handmade 16-plate bull whip. It's of kangaroo hide. It was 9 feet long, although some shorter versions were used depending on the shot required. And then it was sold at auction for $35,000 US. According to Christie's, Harrison Ford originally donated it to the Institute of Archaeology in London to help raise funds for a new facility. So he's a kind-hearted person.
Very nice. That's cool.
So that's kind of cool, eh?
Yeah, I mean, Indiana Jones is probably like my second favorite franchise. A lot of great quotable, things that pop into my head from time to time throughout the day. Obviously, the music by John Williams, who also does Star Wars. Very iconic tunes there. And such a wonderful, wonderful character, and looking forward to June to see the 5th movie.
Yeah, I was a little bit like, oh, I don't know, but then I saw the trailer. It looks great, and I'm like an anti deep fake person, but I thought the deep fake looks amazing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I just really enjoy is just watching my favorite characters back. I don't care how old they are, but as long as they're back on the big screen, it brings a certain joy to my heart to be able to see them. I mean, I'm watching Harrison Ford in the Apple TV show. What is that called?
It's
Shrinking.
shrinking. That's a great show.
Yeah,
Love it.
great show. And it's just wonderful to see Harrison Ford back on the big screen as Indiana Jones. Whether this will be his last adventure, hopefully. If the rumors are true about retiring the character and having nobody else play it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the same with Black Panther. They've retired that.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a good idea, good call.
All right. So the next costume here, we're coming up to the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Should I do the song?
Yes.
Do you want me? Dun, 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 dun. That's a good picture, actually, that one.
So this is obviously one of my picks as far as iconic costume goes. You see the image behind me, of course. Darth Vader is probably my favorite character of all movies, all fiction, all whatever. Darth Vader is the shit, as they say. He is, one of the things that fascinates me about Darth Vader as a character, especially when it comes to his costume, again, not too dissimilar than Batman. If you see a silhouette of Darth Vader, you know exactly what you're looking at. You see the cape, you see the long lines, you see the familiar helmet that has some history in Japanese samurai lore. But Darth Vader definitely for me is my favorite character. I think his outfit is amazing. Again, kind of borrowing elements from Japanese samurai and the feudal era of Japan. The boots are amazing. The inner cloak is awesome. Yes, Dave, impressive, most impressive. Absolutely love Darth Vader, not only as a character in the franchise of Star Wars, but just really his costume. It's again, it's iconic, and it's one of those costumes and characters that if you've never seen a Star Wars, you show a picture of Darth Vader, people know exactly who he is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's funny because my stepmother, she works at the museum my stepmother works at this museum in Toronto, and they have a huge samurai collection there. And she comes up to me one day, or she calls me and she says, "Did you know that Darth Vader is like based off of a samurai?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." And then, but I've had discussions with people because John Mallow who's the costume designer. He was also a military expert. He wrote all these books on military history. And so he was actually hired oftentimes as a consultant. And so there is a bit of a hybrid, I would argue, between World War II, like the World War II Salé, which is inspired by the Japanese Edo period helmet, and the World War II German Salé. Like, for instance, his boots. I was just reading this when going through my notes. His boots are actually riding boots. Did you know that? They're actually British, like knee-high leather riding boots.
Oh, that's
but
cool.
he's wearing, I think. And then he's got a little bit of medieval in here too. Like, some of the parts kind of have that little, like the cape, for instance, apparently was like a medieval style cape. So they've sort of married some different sort of influences. But I think if most people are Star Wars lovers, they know that, Kurosawa was sort of an influence on George Lucas, but the spaghetti westerns, and then like Flash Gordon, and he had all these different influences. So I love that it's kind of like bringing this. But the one thing that I think is really amazing, though, the costume, even though it was a costume designer, it was really Ralph McQuarrie who kind of came up with this look.
Sure.
So as a kid, I was like, Ralph McQuarrie was, the shit. Speaking of that, when I was in my Star Wars club, I would get like they would send us like 8x10 photos, and oftentimes it would be a Ralph McQuarrie a drawing or sketch or something like that. So had them up in my room. I had a scrapbook that I made. So it's always been a big, as much as I love John Mallow and I think it's fantastic, I think this actually really is a Ralph McQuarrie design.
Inspiration. Yeah, absolutely. I think there is one Ralph McQuarrie image of Vader fighting Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker has like a breathing apparatus.
Mhm.
And I think I had that in my bedroom in high school.
It's very
Um,
famous.
very, very famous, and I loved
Yeah.
that look.
Well,
And
apparently, did you hear this story? Like originally, like sort of Vader was supposed to be like a Bedouin, like, because like Dune is sort of an inspiration. So he
right,
had this idea that he'd be like a Bedouin, sort of like dressed in black with the shroud around his face and everything. And then it was McQuarrie who said, well, wait a second, is it going to be going between ships? Like, how's that going to
right,
work? How is he going to breathe?
right.
So he came up with this idea of him having a breathing apparatus. That's why I sort of think that that's even though George is sort of describing to McQuarrie what he thinks he should look like, I think really
Yeah.
McQuarrie had a lot of influence on.
Influence. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And there's a comic book series that kind of tells George Lucas's original story ideas, and he's got Vader in there, Anakin. But yeah, absolutely fascinating. It's funny too because what would Star Wars look like without Ralph McQuarrie? I think it would really look very different. And I know Ralph McQuarrie had his hand in designing a lot of other science fiction from the 70s. Obviously, we mentioned Battlestar Galactica.
Yes.
So there's a lot of Ralph McQuarrie in that,
Mhm.
which I think is amazing.
And that's got sort of like an Egyptian kind of,
Yes,
if you look
yeah,
at this, what I was going to say, one of the things I love, I'll say The Mandalorian, you can see like Doug Chang, who's now the current sort of art director, I suppose
right.
you would call him. You can see that they've harnessed, they've reused some of
Hmm.
Ralph McQuarrie's concepts, and I think that like his family must be like that would be so thrilling to see that,
Absolutely, yeah.
you know.
And it's funny, I don't know if you're probably not a Star Wars animation watcher, but Darth Vader appears in the show Rebels, and the outfit and the mask in Rebels for Darth Vader is very reminiscent of the Ralph McQuarrie look. He's got some very
It's a little slimmer?
yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
slimmer, and the lines are a lot more deliberate and sharp. Even the profile of him when he's shown in profile is I don't know. There's something about that helmet that is just amazing.
I have a friend who's really a fan of the animation series, and I said, "Okay, maybe I should check it out," because like I usually don't because it's like it's animated, it's not like a costume designer hasn't done it, and I just have never kind of entertained it. So, but it sounds like I should.
Yeah,
And the Clone Wars too.
yeah, Dave Richards just that comment I made, and Chopper, the character of Chopper the droid, is very Ralph McQuarrie. When you look at the original drawings for C-3PO and R2-D2, C-3PO looks like the character, the android from Metropolis, and you've got R2-D2 with the arms sticking out of the dome, which later is used as Chopper,
Mm.
which I think is cool. The thing about animation is funny. Obviously it's animation, but it's a medium that really it tells a very interesting story. I have said that I really have enjoyed Star Wars animation a lot more than a lot of the live action stuff because I don't know. There's something about the planning in animation that you really have to plan, a little more intense, I think, because you're kind of setting your plan in stone when it comes to the animated process. You can always reshoot stuff, but I think to be able to draw certain scenes really gets costly, and not that reshooting doesn't get costly, but I think it's more the storytelling and animation is more deliberate. And I don't know if you've seen any of the Star Wars Visions shorts. You really should, because
Okay.
the stories in those will blow you away. They don't hold back emotionally. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I will.
Excellent. Yes. Yes, Megan. Our my lovely friends know me
Yes, he is the
so
best villain
so
ever,
well.
though.
Let's see. Do we have one more? One more. Yes, of
Yes,
course. The
just to
best.
piggyback off of you. All right, so I was saying to you, that I dressed up as, when I was 10, I dressed up as Leia for Halloween. I had brown hair, so I was able to kind of just do my hair up in a coil, though it wasn't like as good as that. And I made my dress out of a sheet. I wore it with like a white turtleneck, and then my brother made me this blaster. So this costume definitely had an impact on me. I think it was one of the first times I'd ever seen a strong female. And I know that sounds sort of cliche, right?
Yeah,
But we
but
hadn't
it's
really
true.
seen a female, that was mouthy, that was beautiful, that was strong, intelligent, a good fighter. She can handle herself. So I think that's sort of part and parcel why I love this so much. And the costume is so simple. Like, it really is. And
Right.
so it's funny because going back through my notes, like, there is some influence from Dune on Star Wars. And then I was watching Dune. My husband works at the film festival every year. So he snuck me into Dune so I could see a screening of it before it had been released. And then I noticed that Lady Jessica, one of the
Mm,
early scenes, I couldn't even believe it, actually. She is wearing basically this dress, but in
mm,
black. And I thought, wow, like, talk about kind of like full circle,
right.
because
Yeah.
she, at one point, she has it down, but it's like at the mock, and then she puts the hood up and she's
Yeah.
outside in the rain. And when I looked at it, because like it's almost like it's a very full hood because it's all gathered into her neck, so it has a lot of fullness that Leia can cover her hair with. So I thought that was really interesting. So this costume, was designed by John Mallow, but again, it went through a lot of. I was looking through like all of my notes, and there were a lot of people who had a hand in this design, including Ralph McQuarrie, who I had mentioned already. There is another concept artist. Who is it? Alex Tavolaris. You might have seen some of his artwork. So he actually, like, they had her as a blonde, they had her as a brunette. They were kind of basing her off of Flash Gordon. There was a character in
Mhm.
Flash Gordon. So one of the things that I got into a fight, and I don't know why I did this because this is the dumbest thing. Don't ever get in a fight with people on social media. I
What?
got I got I got into a fight about her buns. So they're like, the bun issue is going to be kind of like anything. Like, I don't know that it'll ever be solved. But basically what my opinion is that I think George, when he talks about the inspiration for the buns, I think he is misremembering. I think the simplest answer is usually the most accurate answer. And what it was is that Carrie Fisher had a hairstylist who was Irish, this really great Irish hair designer. And she basically, had Carrie Fisher come in, and she had all these sort of inspirations for different styles of hairdress that they could come up with. And so they were just playing around. They were just sort of playing around with different ways to do her hair. And so they tried out this particular look. And then Carrie Fisher went down to show George and said, like, what do you think? And he's like, well, what do you think? She goes, I like it. And he's like, okay. So I think that makes sense. So there's all these other arguments about, like, is it, Mexican banditas or something, or is it
And
like,
I have seen the Mexican bandito picture of the buns inspiration supposedly for Leia here.
yeah. So but there was I still don't buy it. Like, there was this thing where I think they were talking about, where is it here? Mexican Revolution. There was this style of doing the bun where it was like kind of twisted like this, and they put a stick in it.
Mhm.
And that was actually Queen Amidala who had that style. It wasn't
Right.
Leia. Leia's
Yeah.
is like a cinnamon bun, right?
Right.
So if you look at, like, say, old Flash Gordon, the main character and the female character in Flash Gordon had that sort of style of braid on her hair. It was like it was braided and then coiled. So like that. But also in the 1940s, like a lot of women would wear their hair like that, like, but also medieval, like you'd see women with these sort of medieval style. They'd have these buns and then they might have braids hanging down and stuff, very medieval, because it was kind of like what they call a caul. They used to put these cages. Yeah. So that one's got like, it's that one's like a twisted thing. So, okay, this is just my opinion, but I don't really buy it because I think George is just misremembering that's the case. So this particular style, what they do is they take it and they twist it and they put a stick in it. And that's actually a Hopi woman. It's not a bandita or whatever. That was the other thing. So anyway, that's my opinion. You guys can say wrong, but anyway, that's what I think. So,
and here's the bandito.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Which looks looks like Leia. Let's get these. Damn you. Here it is on this side. Yeah, it's this one over here, but yeah, interesting.
I personally think that George is taking credit for something that he didn't do. And George has done that before. Like he's misremembered. So this is where I got into a fight with people on social media. So I tend to always go with what is the most simple. Oh, there's Queen Amidala there. So that looks to me more like that than the Leia one does.
Yeah.
Leia's isn't like a cinnamon bun. It's done like a crescent.
Yeah.
Whereas that one is like a twist. So that's my personal opinion. You guys can disagree with me, but that's what I personally believe.
Interesting.
And
yeah.
Now, in terms of her costume, though, it's sort of like someone called it like mock medieval. Like it's sort of got a bit of a medieval thing. You got the full long sleeves and everything. You got the hood. It's full length, but then it has a bit of a modern twist to it. And I've been sort of racking my brain for like ages, like, why is it white? And then I found this sort of quote. I think it was from John Mullo, where he was talking about how, like on Tatooine, everything is sort of earthy colors, everything is sort of natural looking, woven. But then on the space station, like on the Death Star, you've got like the stormtroopers are white, Darth Vader is black. You've got the Imperial, they're either in black or sort of gray or that kind of thing. So what they were saying is, even though Leia, let's say we know now, is Luke's sister, at the time we didn't know that. And so they were saying that she's kind of more of the technological world as opposed to Luke, who is sort of more from the natural world. So that's the reason why they were saying she's in white to kind of tie in. And then she has the silver in her belt to sort of, the white and silver in her belt to sort of tie into that metallic, world. But back to the makeup I was talking about, her makeup is very 1970s. I liked her makeup though. I remember at the time I thought it was great. And but she's wearing a sort of like, her boots are very,
they're almost stormtrooper-ish.
They're almost like stormtrooper boots. Yeah, like mag boots or whatever they would call them in The Expanse, right? So they're very like, even though she's dressed beautifully, she has these like kick-ass boots that she can get things done with, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool. Now, one thing I was going to tell you that I was looking at, and I don't know where I got this from, but it said that on her belt, Leia's center belt buckle, like hands, is in the shape of a hexagon. The final belt contained an upside-down pentagon to fit into the downward point of the belt. I'm not sure if it was intentional, but the shape represents the 4 elements, plus the 5th element of spirit, a perfect moniker for Leia's character. So I don't know where I got that from, but I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I do remember the belt. I mean, it's being covered a little bit here by the fabric. Yes. But from other images, obviously we know what the belt looks like. Another
thing that I haven't seen the costume in person, but I didn't think it was silk. Someone said in my comment section that it is silk. I didn't think it was silk, and the reason is silk is very it's not a very good fabric to use. It tends to snag really easily. But the other reason why I didn't think it was silk is like, do you know Marilyn Monroe's
Dress.
Some Like It Hot dress, the one that
Right.
blows up on the subway grate?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that one over the years, it started out as white. Over the years, it's kind of become an ecru color, and it's gone to auction and everything because that's what happens to silk. It oxidizes over the years. Whereas I've seen pictures for her dress and it still kind of kept that kind of fairly good white color to it. And so that's what made me think it might be. There was a fabric back in the day called Kiana, which was like, again, it was used by a lot of the designers, and it was made by DuPont in 1962. And like, it wouldn't fray, it wouldn't like snag. It was just kind of like, you could wash it, you could throw it in the washing machine and take it out. It would be perfect. You know what I mean? So that's why I thought it was maybe that, but I can't confirm or deny that. So
it would make sense. It would make sense, especially you know, product from DuPont. You got molecules kind of
exactly. It said it had it was silk-like. It had a silk-like blend. And I was telling you earlier that that dress that was used in Logan's Run was also like a polyester. So I think that was a popular thing to use in shows because they probably would have had to have duplicates and so on of that. By the way, I was going to say for Darth Vader, I had read in my notes that apparently there were only 2 helmets made, possibly 3, they said.
Back in the day.
That was it. That was it. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Now, when they went to do Empire, they probably made more. I know they did make more, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And it wasn't symmetrical.
No, they built it up on. Apparently, the costume itself was built on what's his name's body? David Prowse. Yes. Yeah. So they made a cast, and then and I saw pictures. Like, it was really weird. I saw some pictures of some of the costumes that went to auction, and they put foam inside of it, and it was like, or they'd have duct tape, like, you know, it was kind of like really patchy and sort of put together, and not, you know, what you would think. But again, like, they didn't have a lot of money back then, right?
Sure.
So Leia's costume might have, like, I know her Imperial costume, the one that she wears at the medal ceremony. They bought that out, the necklace and the cuff that she wore just at like a jeweler in New York City, I think. So they just bought something off the rack.
Same with Luke Skywalker's jacket from the throne room, the award ceremony. That was found at a thrift store, I heard.
Yeah, and his pants were Levi's.
Yeah. That
they just sort of bleached and took the pockets off. So, you know, they did what they could, right?
Sure, absolutely. I think the inventiveness of you know, again, the folks behind the scenes there, I really love hearing those stories.
Yeah, and actually Guido wore a jacket very similar to his ceremony one.
Yeah.
Just in a different color.
Right.
So, and it was funny because I think it was you who was showing pictures of like pleating. I think it was from Picard, you know, showing that pleating, and I'm like, they've been doing that for like decades, right? In science fiction, using that.
Oh yeah, I love that. It's how you always see like a jacket or whatever, like Rogue One, obviously, Cassian Andor.
And it's from these 1970s. It's from these 1970s motorcycle jackets. And even Vader, they were looking at motorcycle helmets originally to kind of figure out how to do Vader's helmet, like how, you know, he could breathe and all that kind of thing. Yeah. So they were looking at the structure of those to see how could we put this together. And that's how I think John Malla kind of came up with, you know, they decided to do it in pieces so that it would, you know, they could easily remove it if they have to during a take or what, rather than having it being one solid thing that went over his head.
Yeah. It's too cool. I think I would encourage anybody that stumbles upon any of these books, The Art of, or any of the costume books, because there is really a lot of really great work that is displayed and featured in these books. The artistry, the craftsmanship is just amazing to look at and kind of look in detail. And I guess that's one of the reasons that you know, that particular book, Dressing a Galaxy, is so expensive, because people, you know, that's one of the first books that I flipped through when I got it that has so many, you know, really crisp studio, you know, shot pictures that's got, you know, they're a great reference for anybody that might want to cosplay. There's so much detail in those pictures that, you know, I can see why it's why that book in particular is coveted so much by so many people.
Yeah, that's a good point about how they, you know, like Lucas, or they have the what is it, at the ranch, they have all these costumes in
Yeah.
storage, and I know I've read that, like, say the designer of not the Mandalorian, but the other one, she went down there and she was looking at some of the costumes. Boba Fett has,
Sure.
which I know you weren't as crazy about the second one. I wasn't either. So they do have this, and so what's great about that is that they'll pull everything out of storage and then they'll put them on mannequins and they'll do close-ups, and it's like, yes, that's what we want, because a lot of time you don't get to see those details. And even the photo shoots, like, even though this is from a photo shoot with Leia that you had just had there, you can't find high res photos, whereas nowadays everything is done in high res and you can zoom in. And
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's it's great. Again, just, the costumes that are made for movies, they help you be transported to a
Mhm.
galaxy far, far away. And, if you don't pay too much attention to costumes in movies, I think, I would encourage folks to do so, because, I like reading into, like you said, there's the history of the character through costumes, and it's fascinating to me. I love it. Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Like, it's really fun. Like, sometimes when I'm just like, I'm doing a little bit of research on something, I go down a rabbit hole and I have so much fun. That's probably the best part of doing my YouTube channel, is just like going down these rabbit holes and just like, oh my gosh, what a great, like, there's always so many cool stories attached to it. And
Right.
that's what I love. That's what I love the most.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any final words on some of these iconic movie costumes that we've been talking about? Always great to kind of pick these things apart from a deeper level of understanding. I love just, diving deep into these topics. Love it.
Well, yeah, and say for instance, if you were to ask me like next week, like say if it was next week, I probably would have changed my mind, but I feel pretty good about this list.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, like for instance, I did a video on the top 10 what I thought were the most iconic women's costumes, and one of them I had was Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. And
Okay.
someone said, "Oh, that's just a shitty little blue dress. Like, who
Right.
cares?" And I think what makes something iconic isn't just like the quality of it, because obviously there's going to be costumes out there that are more beautiful, or
Sure.
that you might want to wear or something, whatever. But that's not the point, right? The point is that it's like you say, you would see that silhouette of Darth Vader, you would know it right away. Probably
Mhm.
even if you've never seen the movie before, everyone pretty much knows across the world who Darth Vader is. It's so iconic, it's so memorable, and I think in that case, and you don't ever. It's sort of like the Mandalorian. I mean, when you're thinking about it, you're like, oh my god, Pedro Pascal has played the Mandalorian with a helmet on his face the whole time. Like, how often does that happen? Hello, Darth
Right.
Vader. Now, and then you've got his voice as well, right?
Yeah.
Which also is iconic. But truly, it's like, these types of costumes go down in history, and
Mhm.
I'd love to think that even like 100 years from now, people will still remember them.
I think they will. I think they
Mhm,
will. Obviously, Star Wars has been around for quite a few decades, and we're still talking about
mhm.
every aspect of that movie. We're all trying to kind of recapture lightning in a bottle, with everything that we talk about. Especially being a Star Wars podcast. But absolutely, it's something that'll stick around, continue, and hopefully really continue to inspire a new generation of creative people, whether it's folks that like to edit or create graphics, but also design costumes and do that sort of thing for movies or theater or whatever. Because I think it's there's no eye in there's an eye in filmmaking, but there's no eye in team when it comes to putting together you know such iconic movies, especially the type of movies that we really like to talk about and sink our teeth in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, of my list, I'm going to ask you, what would you be your favorite of the list I put together, and then I'll
uh,
pick yours.
I have to say, Indiana Jones, obviously, because again, Raiders of the Lost Ark was a really wonderful favorite movie of mine. It's probably my second, favorite franchise of all time, movie wise. So Indiana Jones for sure.
And I think I picked Darth Vader. I actually thought about having him. So I was like, no, I should have a woman. Like that's sort of why I went, there.
Excellent, excellent. But
Yeah.
all great picks, all wonderful costumes, and I'm really glad. Like I said, you said yes to coming on the show and really talking and deep diving in iconic movie costumes. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun. A fun way to spend a Saturday night.
Absolutely. Like I said, time flies when you're having fun. We've been at it for about 2 hours, but why don't you tell the folks that are still in the chat that survived our discussion where people can find you to say hello there?
Sure. So I have a YouTube channel. It's called Costume Co, like my name here. And you can find me there. I'm also on Twitter, like Ro is, and that's always a great place to say hello to me because I'm pretty much on there every day. So come and check me out there. And it's also I think it's Costume Cinemato. I am there. So,
Excellent. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for having me, Ro.
Oh, no problem. Come back anytime if you have another topic you want to discuss.
I'd love to, and I'd love to have you on my show if you're willing.
Absolutely. That
Okay,
would be
great.
awesome.
We'll come up with some idea.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for joining us here on the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast. If you are new, thank you for joining us. We usually love talking about movies, and this is our passion, but excellent. On behalf of the Red 5 Network, if you wanted to explore some other content creators, check out Red 5 over at bio.link/Red5. We've got over 30 content creators, 30 shows over there to kind of explore. But thank you very much. This is Ro from the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast. Until next time, that's the Scuttlebutt. Talk to you guys later.